Today we have the pleasure of having in the studio with us Professor Angelo Tartaglia, a physicist and expert in the connection between gravity and electrical waves, and also a general scientist who we would like to have discuss and comment on the effects of the virus that has become a pandemic and which very heavily impacted Italy soon after spreading from China, if we believe the standard version of how things have developed. Professor Tartaglia, thank you very much for joining us on the program today.
Thank you.
I would like to start a little bit by trying to depoliticize the subject, because a lot of the mainstream media coverage has been colored by the response in the United States, especially from President Trump and from the White House in general, referring to this virus as first the Wuhan virus, and then the Chinese virus, and most recently in some of the hardcore let's say, nationalist publications in the United States, they've actually referred to this as the Chinese Communist Party virus. We're hoping that a more scientific approach would give us a better insight. Can you tell us your impressions about this virus and its significance in respect to the ongoing global linkages around the world?
Well, first of all, I would like to say that unfortunately humans are often stupid, and what is now we can read on papers or look on the TV and having this kind of declaration is incredible, because it is evident that this crisis, this global crisis of our planet, is something that involves everybody, everywhere, and has deep roots which are not really unexpected. This pandemic has been predicted, not exactly and literally, but in general, and it is not a sort of a surprise. And of course, this means that this is not because there is someone which is especially guilty. It is incredible that some people having responsibility can think of having some advantage in somehow blaming his competitor at the moment. We have something more interesting and intelligent to do now. I think that it is even not really so important to know exactly where the virus started, what literally happened. I mean, it is important from the scientific viewpoint, because it is useful to know what is the mechanism that determines the spillover from some species to the humans. But the real point, the fundamental point, is that this kind of pandemics is an example of a global collapse, and we may expect in the near future other collapses to come in if we are not looking at some deep change in the very structures of the relations between different peoples and different nations in the world, and if we are not available to change the very mechanism at the base of our economy, globalized economy.
Thank you very much for that intro to the subject. Please proceed. Please continue.
Oh, yes. Well, I think, in fact, that biologists can tell us more about this virus and the way it develops, etc. But what is weak and not resilient is the global way the humankind has to live on this planet. We see that a crisis like this one produces immediate effects which can be devastating, because we are not ready to face this kind of emergency, even though the emergencies, I already said, is not really unexpected. So we have to think about this deeply. And I think that more than, medical issues, more than biology, what is involved here is politics and economics, because it is economy, the kind of economy we have been built in the last couple of centuries, which is the origin of this kind of crisis. Well, of course, we have to worry about the way we live during the crisis. We have the problem of the medical care in the West, especially. We had some decades, 1 or 2 decades at least in Italy, during which the idea that dominated was that actually spending and investing in public health was a sort of wasting money, and one had to leave to the private initiative even what had to do with the health care of the people. Now we are saying that without an efficient public health care system, we cannot face emergencies like the one we have now. Most people are realizing that this is a problem, and I hope that this will be a lesson we can learn and change actually our attitude towards the need of having collaboration between people and integration of different capacities and competences, etc. So the things to do are really many, and I realize that what I'm saying may be just a few remind of the real problems. There is much to do, but this is just to highlight the essentials on the problem we have facing at the moment.
Now, when we go further on this road, so there has been some discussion about the aging society, but I spent quite a lot of time in Japan, and Japan is one of the countries that very, very greatly adapted to the aging society. Public access to buildings was changed. Everything was changed in the public areas to allow for older people to move about more easily and to get access to public facilities and so on. That has been much more slowly adopted in the West, of course. It's a different type of culture here. I do think that we need to learn more about this change, and I think that this virus appears, just as you've said, to be a kind of a wake-up call to the change in society that we always were talking about but had not done anything about. So I guess this means that we've seen on the internet a lot of talk about the event 201 and and the various discussions about the danger of these viral pandemics. Would you discount the sort of fringe discussion that this was a planned event, that this virus was a planned event, that in fact that this is just a natural occurrence in a society in which people are living in close proximity to each other and traveling much more than they have in the past? If we can get past that, then we can actually do what you've suggested and give a more scientific approach. If we can't get past this conspiracy theory level, then we're going to have a difficult challenge developing the financing and the institutions necessary to collaborate.
Well, of course, when there is something new and something we can do not completely understand, always some conspiracy theory appears, and so people are suspecting and spreading the idea that there is some evil power beyond the scene which produces this kind of attacks, etc. This is again totally irrational and deprived of any meaning or any sense. One could ask whether even this kind of stupid ideas is sponsored in a way or not, because it is not so different from what we already mentioned concerning the fact that some specific nation has responsibilities with respect to the other. This is always a way to avoid entering in the problem of what are the real origin and the real causes of the crisis we are facing. Now, of course, the points are those you already also mentioned. We have very crowded places in the world. We know that some 80% of the humankind is living or going to the big metropolitan areas. The density of people is very high everywhere. The speed of the movement around is something which is growing and being easier. This is good from one side, but of course it makes the propagation of any kind of pandemics more efficient, and this is what we realize every day now. Some part of the population is more fragile, more keen to be infected, etc. So aging people is, of course, a problem, but especially in the West, we know that the elderly are looked at mainly as consumers. So there are some specialization of the market for aging people. I'm thinking, for example, to a whole state in the United States, like Florida, where a big part of the activities having to do with tourism is thought for the elderly, etc. So the idea is that the aging people are a factor of economy as long as they can spend. If they are not in a position to spend, well, they are a problem. They do not produce, in a sense, so let them well go. This is not everywhere the same. Of course, there is tradition, especially in Japan, that you mentioned, of a different attitude, the old attitude towards the old people. In the past, one used to think that old people had to be cared, had to be rewarded for their activity when they were young, they were sage, etc. Of course, the number now have overthrown this special condition because when you have so many people being at an age above 60, 65, 70, you cannot just think that they are the single individuals who are have to be honored, etc. But it is also true that you cannot just put them, as it happens in part of the West, even Italy, in some places where they are there, cared more or less, but nothing else. And of course, when something like this pandemics happens, they are, the typical target, the weak point of the infection. It is a cultural problem. Again, it brings us back to the kind of society and the kind of economy. I come always back on economy, because the relation among humans have different dimensions. In the last 250 and 50 years, the part which has to do with the economical relations has become dominant.